Hi, this is Sarit Switzer, and welcome to the It Is Taught podcast, a podcast devoted to the teachings of Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi as recorded in his most famous work, the Tanya. My hope for this show is to make these teachings accessible and relatable to the average person, regardless of prior Jewish education or affiliation. The episodes follow the prescribed daily study portions and are meant to serve as practical lessons in how to live your life as your true self and develop an authentic and powerful relationship with your Creator. I have personally experienced the effects the study of this work has had on me, and I'm excited to share what I can of this knowledge with you. So please join me on this journey of learning, self-growth, and connection with your source. Okay, so this is the very first episode of the It Is Taught podcast. And as a disclaimer, I'm figuring this out as I go. This is the very first time that I've ever done a podcast before. So you guys are going to be learning together with me in this process. So please bear with me as we figure this out together. I'm more than welcome to feedback. I'd love to hear feedback from you as the show goes on, to hear how I can improve the show, what you think of the show, and all of those kind of things. Another disclaimer, my friends tell me that I give too many disclaimers often when I talk, but it is what it is. So another disclaimer is that the official launching of this podcast is actually going to be in a few days on the Hebrew date of Yud Tes Kislev, which comes out to the 23rd of November, 2021. And the reason why that the podcast is going to be launching on that date, those of you that have familiarity with the subject will realize it, but just in case you don't, that date in relation to this book that we're going to be learning together is a very, very significant date. It's considered to be the new year of Chabad Hasidus amongst Chabad Hasidim. And the reason for that is it is the anniversary of the liberation of Rabbi Shneur Zalman, the author of this book, otherwise known as the Alter Rebbe. It's the anniversary of his liberation from being imprisoned in the year 1798. So what happened, just to give a little bit of historical background, is basically in Russia, there was a lot of opposition to the Hasidic movement, and a lot of opposition in particular to Rabbi Shneur Zalman, the Alter Rebbe, from other types of Jews that thought that his teachings were dangerous and not in line with regular Torah Judaism, that they were too mystical and that they just were misinterpreting. There was also a lot of misinformation about what he was teaching and a lot of slander that was being told about him and about his teachings that just wasn't true. But so in any case, there was a certain person from this other side. They were called the Misnogden, the opposers, who they actually gave themselves that name, interesting enough. Anyways, so one of them was this guy named Avigdor, and he actually informed on the Alter Rebbe to the Russian government and told a lie about him. It wasn't actually true. He said that the Alter Rebbe was planning an insurrection and that he was supporting the Ottoman Empire. And so, and as proof of this, he showed that the Alter Rebbe was collecting money for the land of Israel, which at the time was under the rulership of the Ottoman Empire. So as a result of this, the Alter Rebbe was arrested and he was put into prison for crimes of treason. And he stayed there for 53 days, after which he was eventually released as we mentioned, on the date of Yud Tes Kislev, the 19th of Kislev in the year 1798. So interesting, as like just kind of like a nice little factoid to know, these 53 days that he was imprisoned for, they correspond to the first 53 chapters of the first portion of the Tanya, which we'll be learning together. So that was interesting. I actually just learned that myself in the process of doing a little bit of research for this little introductory talk that I'm giving. And a few other just really interesting tidbits that I learned in doing this research. This is from Wikipedia, so take that for what you want. You can you can fact check what I'm saying, but I thought this was pretty interesting. Is a few other notable events that Yud Tes Kislev, that the 19th of Kislev is noted for. Well, first of all, it's thought to be the day that the Alter Rebbe was conceived, because he was born exactly 9 months later on the 18th of Elul. So that's pretty interesting. The 19th of Kislev is also the anniversary of passing of the Maggid of Mezrich, who was the Alter Rebbe's teacher, and he was the successor of the Baal Shem Tov in the year 1772. Another thing is that the 19th of Kislev is the birthday of the Alter Rebbe of the Hasidim of Zichlin, which I've never heard of. But they were murdered in the Holocaust, unfortunately, the dynasty of that. But that was his birthday in the year 1809. The 19th of Kislev in the year 2003 was actually the day that Saddam Hussein was captured. And in the 19th of Kislev in the year 2011 was the year that the Iraq War came to an end. And then most recent event, which is pretty interesting, is that on the 19th of Kislev in the year 2017, President Trump, who was in office at that time, that is the day that he publicly announced that and formally made the announcement that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. And he said that he's going to officially move the U.S. embassy there. So, so some interesting events that happened on Yotes Kislev. Okay, so now I thought it would be interesting to talk a little bit about how this project came to be, what inspired me to do this project, and also maybe a little bit about what I'm hoping to gain out of this project and what I'm hoping to give to you guys. So what inspired me to do this project was actually the passing of my grandfather, my maternal grandfather. He passed away several years ago, actually, in the year 2012, on August 26, 2012, which in Hebrew, the date for that is the 8th of Elul in the year 5782. So he was the very first grandparent that I had who passed away. And he was a really, really special man. Not only was he a really special man, I actually felt pretty close to him in a lot of ways. I feel like I take after him in a lot of ways. I feel like my kind of creative and artistic side and appreciation for the supernatural and, kind of more artsy kind of things comes from him. He was really into music. He loved jazz music and classical music. And he was really just like a very sensitive soul, and he read different books. He loves like the genre of horror and fantasy. He actually gave me my very first Stephen King novel when I was 12 years old. So we really shared that appreciation for spirituality in a lot of ways. In his older years, he actually got a lot closer to Judaism in that way. In terms of his spirituality, he began to channel it into that way. He started learning on a regular basis about different ways. He wanted to keep Shabbos. He was like learning the laws of Shabbos and trying to keep it to the best of his ability. He started praying on a regular basis, and he really, wanted to just do everything right. He would really take his time when he prayed. He would also, together with my grandmother, they would visit the Rebbe's Ohel, the Rebbe's gravesite, on a fairly regular basis. To this day, when I go to visit the Ohel, I use his Mina Lashon, like there's a prayer book that you take with you when you go to the grave. That's often said as a customary thing. So usually the one I have his, and I also have my grandmother's. They both had these books, and I will usually use his book because I feel pretty close to him when I go to pray there. What else can I say about him? He was a Kohen. His name at birth was, his Hebrew name, as you might know from when I mentioned that this in the title of this podcast, his Hebrew name was Avraham Yitzchak ben Binyamin HaKohen. So he was a Kohen. And in English, his name was actually Isidore Cohen. That was the name that he was born with, but his English name that he was born with. But then, unfortunately, due to the circumstances at the time when he grew up, it was not so easy for Jews to get jobs, unfortunately. So he actually changed his name to Robert Kane to sound not as Jewish. And it, and that was the name that he went by for most of his life, was Robert Kane. So, so he was a really, really special man. And he was also, as I mentioned, the very first grandparent that passed away for me. So it really did impact me really deeply. And it got me thinking kind of like existentially about life and mortality and all kinds of things like that. And I started thinking about how, when a person lives in this world and they live for a certain amount of years, how is it that their life, we say, they lived on, and they never really go away and whatever. And so I started thinking, what really makes a person live on? What really makes a person immortal? is really their children. That's a way that they can live on. So thank God he did have children, and I'm a descendant of his. So that kind of gave me a little bit of comfort that he's living on through me, through my life. But at the same time, it got me thinking about my own mortality and my own life, and the fact that I don't have children right now. God willing, someday I will, but right now I don't. And so then I started thinking about, what can I do to continue this flow of immortality at this time? And I thought about it, and I thought, well, another thing that really makes a person immortal is books, and different kinds of teachings. So I decided that might be a really nice way, in tribute to him, to start writing something in his memory and start writing something in his honor. And due to him being a very spiritual and deep kind of person, I thought that it might be really fitting to take this book of the Tanya, which is a very deep book and is a very spiritual book, and to start writing up some things, something regarding the Tanya, some summaries in his honor, in his memory. So as those of you who are Chabad are familiar with, or maybe some of you even that aren't Chabad might be familiar with this idea, the book of the Tanya is divided up into different portions to read on a daily basis, so that the idea of it is that we complete the entire book of Tanya every year. So every day, we call this chitas. Well, it's actually part of chitas. Chitas is it's an acronym that means Chumash, Tehillim, and Tanya. So for people who are, of the Chabad tradition, what this means is that every day we read a portion of the Chumash, which is the daily Torah portion corresponding to the day, a portion of Psalms, Tehillim, and a portion of the Tanya, of this book that we'll be learning together. And through doing this on a daily basis, we are able to complete a cycle of these books, of the Chumash and the Tanya, throughout the entire year. The Tehillim, the Psalms, we actually finish every month, but nevertheless, it's a cycle that we go through. So I've been doing this, for a really long time. I've been learning the daily Tanya portion. But to be totally honest, when I have read it in the past, it's some of the stuff is pretty deep. Sometimes you're kind of in a rush, and I wouldn't always necessarily really pay that much attention to the words that I was reading. I just kind of read it through. Okay, I did my thing. I'm good to go, And so I decided, with the passing of my grandfather and wanting to do something kind of meaningful in tribute to him, this might be a really good opportunity to learn these portions a little bit more in depth, and maybe write some thoughts about them, maybe write up some summaries. So I started doing this, and this is, quite a while ago. Like I mentioned, he passed away in the year 2012. And so I started taking the daily Tanya portions and summarizing them. But alas, this lasted for a little while. I did it maybe, I don't know, a couple of weeks or something like that. And the project kind of fell away. Here and there, I would pick it back up, and again, every few years, I would say, okay, now I'm going to be really consistent about it and do it. And, once again, it never really stuck, So where that changed is actually a couple of years ago, pretty much right before COVID happened, maybe like a year and a half before COVID, I would say. I started going to this yoga class in the city. It was a yoga studio where I would practice the yoga that I practice. And I would go every single day. The style of yoga that I do is a type of style that you're really supposed to do every day. So I would go, every weekday, I guess, Mondays through Fridays. And I would travel there on the subway. And it was super early in the morning. And so, what do you do super early in the morning if you're a religious Jewish person of the Chabad persuasion? Is you say chitas, you say your Chumash and Tehillim and Tanya, like I've been mentioning. And so I'd get through that, and or I guess I'd really focus on the Tanya. I'd want to do that before I got there. And I realized I still had a good chunk of time on the subway, and I get bored pretty easily. I want something to do. And so I started thinking to myself, this is a really good opportunity for me to get back into those summaries that I started doing back then. And I could start doing them again, and I thought to myself, I really would like to learn the Tanya properly and not just skim it over the way that I've been doing it. And what I've learned from experience is the best way to learn is through teaching. So I started taking notes on the daily Tanya portions, and I started formulating these notes into kind of maybe I would say poetic sort of summaries that I thought could be palatable to other people. And I had in mind an audience of somebody who had no familiarity with the Tanya at all, and how would these words be accessible to them? And when I say people who have no familiarity with the Tanya, I would put myself in that category as well. Like, I wanted to really have these summaries be such that it's not like just terms, like there's a lot of really complicated terms in the Tanya, Atzilus, Spheros, Chachma, Bina, all these things, that even if you've been learning them for years, we can just throw these terms around, but do we really understand what these terms mean, And so I decided to write these summaries in such a way that's like really, really, really just in plain English and just, make it super commonsensical. First of all, for myself. And then I figured that, okay, if I'm writing this up for myself, I might as well share it with other people, because I knew, first of all, why not share it with other people? And I also knew that through sharing it with other people, it would force me to be really, really articulate and really, really clear in in the ideas that I was trying to convey, because I was able to picture that there would be like an audience reading these things. So I started to do that. So I'd write up these little summaries on the subway, once again, really mostly just because I needed something to do. And I'd write it up really quickly, on my little Android phone, and then post it on Facebook. And that's it, there you go. And this really became super consistent, and it became my daily routine. And I started doing it every morning on the way to yoga, there you go. Of course, then we had, Saturday and Sunday when I wasn't going to yoga. But because I had already developed this habit of doing it on a daily basis, I found that I actually was pretty good about staying consistent on those days as well. Like, I kind of just got into the flow of doing it. And lo and behold, I got really good feedback on these summaries. People commented, people liked them. And people would message me and say, they never really understood Tanya before they read my summaries. And it was really amazing. I was getting like really good feedback. And somehow, I don't remember if somebody suggested this to me or I thought of the idea. I thought of the idea of creating a WhatsApp group where I could send out the summaries through WhatsApp so people could get them that way too. And so I developed a WhatsApp group that has a little bit over 100 members at this point. So once again, I started posting them there, and I got really, really good feedback. And as time went on, then COVID happened and I stopped going to my yoga studio, but I had gotten so in the habit at that point of writing these summaries on a daily basis. I really thank God I continued with them, And then before you know it, it was really amazing. I reached the end of the book and I realized that I actually written a summary for the entire book for the entire year. So that was a really good feeling. And then I thought to myself, like, I should really do something with these summaries. Why don't I put it into a book form? Why don't I publish it as a book in honor of my late grandfather? That'd be such a nice memory to him, such a nice way to have him live on, as I mentioned. So I started researching what that would entail. I actually contacted by a friend's recommendation. I contacted a woman named Ani Lipschitz. Maybe some of you have heard of her, she had actually published her own book on the Tanya. And I spoke to her on the phone, and she was so, so, so helpful. I was just like so grateful. She really led me through the step-by-step process as to how she published her book. She gave me resources. She gave me names, everything, what it would entail, advice about to self-publish or not to self-publish. It was really amazing. So I took a ton of notes, and then I started working on this. The first thing that it seemed like the first step that I needed to do is to contact this editor that she had recommended, who edits the Jewish aspect of the books. Like, I said, okay, if I'm going to put this book into print, I really want to make sure that I know what I'm talking about here and that I don't publish anything nobody's perfect, obviously, but I want to just make sure that I'm kind of on the right track here and just get like a insight from a professional to make sure that this is really a project that's worthwhile. So I got in touch with the editor and I sent him my manuscript to review. At this point, I had, again, like I mentioned, entries for the entire year. And it was really nice to see. So I got kind of good and bad news. He wrote back to me and he said that he was really impressed with everything. And he said that he likened my style of writing to Tzvi Friedman, actually, which I took as a really, really, really big compliment. If any of you are familiar with Tzvi Friedman, that's a huge compliment. So that was really nice. But the more constructive criticism side is he asked me at some point, he said, was it intentional that the entries weren't really consistent. Like, are you going for a consistent style? Like, what is going on over here? And I knew exactly what he was talking about. As I mentioned, I mean, I wrote most of these entries on the subway, literally like rushing to yoga. So I didn't put that much thought into the format of them. There were a lot of spelling mistakes, a lot of typos, a lot of stuff like far from edited, And he advised that I go back and I do a lot of editing on my own first before coming back to him. He also made an interesting comment that he noticed that here and there I would reference some secular things, some books or movies or quotes or whatever from secular thinkers and try to tie it into the Tanya. I didn't do it a lot, but I did it here and there. And he felt that that was inappropriate. And he also felt that was unnecessary. And while I had like a little bit of resistance at first to that idea, after thinking about it, I realized that he was really right. And I realized that the Tanya is perfect and that these teachings are really perfect and they don't need to, like, sure, it's good to explain these things in English and in like simple terms that people can understand, but there's no reason to have to bring in secular ideas. Like there's a saying in Hebrew, I'm not sure where it comes from, but it says Chochma b'goyim tamin, Torah b'goyim al tamin. So wisdom amongst the nations you should believe, but Torah amongst the nations do not believe. Meaning to say that there's a lot of wisdom out there in the world. There are tons of things that we can learn from the non-Jewish world, from the secular world, just in terms of just knowledge and understanding of the world and how the world works. But when it comes to how to live our lives, when it comes to trying to find deeper meaning in life, that's not something that we can really find in the outside world, at least not something that isn't already in Torah and much more deeply and profoundly in Torah. So I decided to really stick to that. And so I really saw his point, and I decided to keep that in mind going forward, that when I do these writings and teachings, I really don't need to bring in anything secular here at all, unless, maybe in the podcast, I might here and there. I haven't really decided yet if I'm going to do that or not. Maybe if I really want to illustrate like a very specific point, but yeah, I don't really need to use anything secular as like a point of comparison or elucidation. So anyhow, and I hope you guys appreciate this, that I'm sharing this entire journey with you, and it's somewhat interesting to you. I thought it was interesting to let you know the trajectory of how this all came to be. So that's why I'm sharing it with you, but feel free to skip ahead. You can skip this entire episode. Maybe I should have mentioned that in the beginning, because it's really not about, we don't get into the teachings of the Tanya until the next episode, which will officially be the first episode. But if you are interested in hearing how this came about, please continue to listen. So basically, where we're up to in the story is that I had now contacted this editor, and he gave me some advice, and he said that before having him edit it, I really should take the time and go back and edit it myself. And so I started to do that, and I started to, those of you that know me know that I'm really into habits, and I'm really into doing things. Like I've realized through time that instead of having goals, it's better to have habits that lead you to have goals. So I started creating this habit of working on the book for an hour and a half every day. Sometimes I miss, obviously, but I really try to be as consistent as possible. I actually created this thing of like, I have like these chocolate coins from Hanukkah from last year. And every time that I complete an hour and a half of the book, I plop one of those chocolate coins into a glass container to kind of give me a sense of feedback and positive encouragement to realize that I'm really, working with this project a lot. So I've been doing this, and I've been working on this every single day as much as I can for an hour and a half, sitting down with my entries and going over them again, going over the Tanya, and really just seeing how much I missed, how many mistakes I made, how many things need to be improved and everything, and just how raw those first entries were. So that's been a whole project in itself. But so then in the process of doing that, so I continue to post my entries on WhatsApp. And usually at this point, I'm still posting my old entries from last year. And so what I noticed started happening is I started to realize that while part of the reason for me doing this project was for me to understand the Tanya deeper and for me to have my daily Tanya learning be more meaningful and more intentional and really pay attention to what I was reading and not just like skim over the Tanya and read it really quickly or whatever. And while it served that purpose in the beginning when I initially would write up these entries, after a while, like now that I was working on the book, ironically, when it came to the daily entries, I actually didn't put any more thought into that, because what I was doing is I was just taking the old entries from a year ago and just copy paste, send them into the group. So I was like, that's kind of a shame. Like, I'm not really incorporating these things so much anymore. I mean, I could read my entries, but it doesn't give that same spirit. It doesn't give me that same internalization as I get when I teach. As I've mentioned, that I really believe, I know from my own experience, the best way to learn is through teaching. And so I decided to experiment a little bit with voice notes. That's another thing that a few people had mentioned to me in the past. They said that, they learn better through auditory learning as opposed to reading. So I thought, sure, why not? So what I started to do is, as an addendum to the written entries that I would give, I would start to leave little WhatsApp voice notes with the summary of the day of the Tanya. And once again, I got really good feedback on that. I didn't notice a ton of people listening to them, but that was okay. I was actually pretty comfortable with that because it was really raw and it was really just an experiment. But it kind of gave me a sense of like, okay, is this something that would be interesting? And that's basically where we come to the podcast. And that's what gave me the idea of doing a podcast. I thought that a podcast would be a really cool way to take this more auditory style learning, this more auditory medium, and do it in a more systematized way, in a way that could reach more people. And it could be a really cool way for me to promote my book, which I'm still working on. I'm still editing. It's still in the process of, but it could be a really cool way for me to hopefully gain an audience and gain followers for people to eventually be interested in getting my book. So here we are. And that's what brings us to today, to this podcast. And just, to keep you up to speed with my book, where I'm up to with that is I have about a month worth of entries left until I complete the first portion of the book, which is called Likutei Amarim, for those of you that are familiar with that, at which point I'll be ready to send it to the editor. And then I hopefully would like to publish the very first portion of that book. I don't have a publisher as of yet. I haven't decided fully if I want to publish it through a publisher or if I want it to be self-published. If any of you have any suggestions or leads for that, I'm totally welcome to that. You can contact me on Facebook or YouTube, Instagram, wherever, or also through email. That might be best at itistaught@gmail.com. So that's just a little side note for that. And so here we are with this podcast. And I decided my goal for this podcast was to have it launched by the 19th of Kislev of this year. And so it looks like I will reach that goal. We're a few days as of today. I'm recording this episode on the 13th day of Kislev. I don't know if I'll get it out today, but I'm hoping to get it out in a couple days. So really by next week should be the official launch of the podcast. So I'm really excited about that. And so just a couple more disclaimers, again, me and my disclaimers. But, first of all, I'm going to try to make the teachings and everything I say in the podcast to be super, super, super palatable to everybody. Really, you don't need any Jewish education at all to follow it. You don't even need to be Jewish. I think a lot of these teachings and ideas are relevant to non-Jewish people. I've had non-Jewish people read my postings on Facebook, comment on them, find them meaningful. So I'm going to try to keep it as palatable as possible. But that being said, there are going to be quite a few Hebrew terms as we go through it. If you follow the podcast consistently, you'll probably learn these terms and you'll probably become more familiar with them. But please don't get thrown off. If you hear things and you get confused and you don't know what I'm talking about or whatever, I try to be as clear as possible. So just try to bear with me. Try to, stick with the program basically. And you might surprise yourself with noticing how much you're able to retain and learn. And it really is, like learning a language, that it's just the more familiarity you have with these terms, the easier they become. And then my final disclaimer, of course, is that I am far from perfect and I totally and fully expect that I'm going to be making mistakes. I'm not an expert in this subject. It's one of those things that the more you learn, the more you realize how much you just don't know. And I know, a certain amount. I think I have a certain basic understanding of the subject matter that we'll be talking about. But if I make mistakes, which I'm most probably will, I really, really, really would appreciate people to contact me if you notice any mistakes that I make, or if you have any comments at all. If there's any feedback, like I mentioned, that you have, please do let me know. The best way to contact me is through email, probably at itistaught@gmail.com. But I've also set up a YouTube account. I've set up a Facebook account, a Twitter account, and Instagram. I'm everywhere. So you can leave comments there. You can message me wherever you want, and I will see it. And please, again, do let me know if you find me making any mistakes, or if you find something isn't clear, if you have any questions, maybe at some point we can do an episode where I answer questions people have. So that's about it. I think that this reaches the conclusion of my introductory episode, and I'm super excited, kind of nervous because I've really never done this before, but we will figure this out together, as I mentioned. And I will see you on the 19th of Kislev, or I'll hear you, or I will I will speak to you, I guess is a better way to say it, on the 19th of Kislev in a few days. And until then, I hope you've enjoyed this journey with me, this story of how this podcast came to be, and have a great day. Till then, bye. Thanks for listening to the It Is Taught podcast, hosted by Sarit Switzer. This podcast is dedicated in loving memory of my maternal grandfather, Avraham Yitzchak ben Binyamin HaKohen of blessed memory. Music by Shoshana. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support the show, please share it with others and subscribe on YouTube, Apple iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And make sure to leave us a 5-star review. To find out more about the It Is Taught project, including more information on my soon-to-be published book, please visit our website, itistaught.com. To catch the latest from me, follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Looking forward to speaking with you tomorrow, and until then, have a great day.